The moment my aunt stood up at my wedding reception and pointed at me across the room, in front of 200 people, in front of my husband who had just slipped a ring onto my finger an hour earlier, I felt something strange happen inside me. Not panic, not shame, something closer to relief, because I had been waiting for that moment for almost 3 years. Let me back up. My grandfather, Hector, built everything from nothing. He immigrated to Winnipeg from Portugal in the late 70s with $400 and a suitcase. By the time I was born, he owned two dry cleaning shops in St. James and a modest duplex on Portage Avenue that he rented out for extra income. He was not a rich man by any measure, but he was careful. He saved. He invested quietly in GICs and mutual funds through his credit union. He never talked about money at family dinners, but when he got sick, really sick, stage 3 kidney disease diagnosed the autumn I turned 29, he started talking about it. He called me to his apartment on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it was October because the elm trees outside his window had gone completely yellow and the light coming through the glass made everything look like an old photograph. He was sitting at his kitchen table with a mug of weak tea and a manila folder in front of him. "Fiona," he said. "That's me, Fiona. I want to talk to you about what happens after." I told him not to talk like that. He waved his hand the way he always did when he thought someone was being sentimental at the wrong time. The folder had a copy of his will. He walked me through it slowly. His estate, which he estimated at roughly $420,000, including the duplex, the savings, and a small RRSP, was to be split equally between my mother and my Aunt Vera. My mother had passed away 6 years earlier, ovarian cancer, fast and brutal, so her half was to pass directly to me and my younger brother, Owen. Vera, my mother's older sister, would receive her own half outright. "I'm telling you this," my grandfather said, "because Vera will contest it. She always thought she deserved more because she stayed in Winnipeg and your mother left. My mother had moved to Calgary when she married my father. But the will is registered, it's been witnessed, and I've left a copy with my lawyer, a man named Mr. Bouchard on Corridon Avenue. You have his number now. Keep it." I kept it. My grandfather died 14 months later in December. Owen was 24 and finishing his electrician's apprenticeship. I was 30 and working as a radiology technologist at Health Sciences Center. Neither of us had any reason to think anything would go wrong. The will was clear. Mr. Bouchard had the original. It was all straightforward, except it wasn't. 2 weeks after the funeral, Vera called me. She said Mr. Bouchard had received an updated will dated 8 months prior, just 4 months before my grandfather died. That changed the distribution. Under the new document, Vera received 70% of the estate. Owen and I would split the remaining 30. I remember sitting down on the floor of my kitchen when she told me. Not because I was devastated about the money, though I won't pretend that didn't matter. Owen and I had each been expecting somewhere around $100,000. Which for a 24-year-old apprentice and a 30-year-old paying off a condo in a city where housing was becoming impossible, mattered quite a lot. I sat down because of the dates. Because my grandfather had shown me his will in October, the new one was supposedly signed in August of the same year. 2 months before he sat across from me at that kitchen table and told me very specifically what the document said. I called Mr. Bouchard the next morning. He was careful on the phone. He said the updated will had come through a different law office, a firm downtown that he didn't recognize. He said the signature looked like Hector's, but he hadn't witnessed it himself and the circumstances were unusual. He told me, quietly, that if I had reason to believe something was wrong, I should not wait. I didn't wait. I found a wills and estates lawyer named Ms. Okafor through a referral from a colleague at work. She was direct in a way I immediately trusted. She looked at both documents side by side and asked me one question. "Do you have anything in your grandfather's handwriting from around the time this new will was allegedly signed?" I did. I had his birthday card from that August. I had a grocery list he'd written on a notepad and left on my counter during a visit. I had 3 years of Christmas cards. Miss Okafor sent everything to a forensic document examiner, a woman who worked out of Edmonton and regularly testified in Ontario and BC courts. The examiner's finding, delivered 6 weeks later in a 12-page report, was that the signature on the updated will showed inconsistencies with authenticated samples of my grandfather's handwriting from the same period. The pressure patterns were wrong. The letter connections were wrong. Someone had practiced his signature, possibly using older samples, but the motor memory wasn't there. It was a forgery. Miss Okafor filed the application to challenge the will in Manitoba's Court of Queen's Bench. Vera hired her own lawyer. The process was slow and expensive and emotionally exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every document request, every deposition, felt like I was being asked to drag my grandfather's life out into a cold room and sort through it under fluorescent lights. Owen handled it differently than I did. He got quiet, withdrew, stopped coming to Sunday dinners at our aunt's house, which honestly was probably the right instinct. I kept going because I felt like I owed it to my grandfather to finish what he had started. Then my investigator, Ms. Okafor, had recommended a licensed private investigator named Mr. Delacroix to help locate financial records, found the other accounts. I need to explain the duplex. My grandfather had been planning to sell it. The Winnipeg real estate market had moved considerably since he bought the property, and a buyer had come forward 18 months before he died, offering $410,000. My grandfather had been in negotiations. The sale, as far as I knew, had fallen through. It hadn't fallen through. It had closed. 11 months before he died, the duplex had sold for $395,000. The proceeds had been deposited into an account I had never heard of. An account held jointly, and this is the part that made Ms. Okafor very still when Mr. Delacroix sent over the documentation, jointly between my grandfather and Vera, established 9 months before his death, during the period when his kidney disease had progressed to stage 4 and he had begun experiencing what his nephrologist later described as intermittent cognitive impairment. Vera had not disclosed the joint account. She had not disclosed the sale of the duplex. She had presented herself as a grieving sister managing an estate in good faith while sitting on nearly $400,000 that she had helped move into a structure my grandfather may not have fully understood he was signing. I sat with that information for 48 hours before I told Owen. When I called him, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "So what do we do?" I said, "We finish it." The court proceedings took another 7 months. There were delays, there were continuances. There was a period in the spring when I genuinely didn't know if we had enough to win. Miss Okafor was steady through all of it. She reminded me that the standard was balance of probabilities, not beyond reasonable doubt. She reminded me that the forensic evidence was strong. She reminded me, when I called her at 7 in the evening from my car in the hospital parking lot after a hard shift and cried for about 10 minutes, that what I was doing was not just about money. I got married in August. My husband, Will, we'd been together 4 years. We'd gotten engaged the previous spring in Banff, hiking above Lake Louise with a ring in his jacket pocket, had been my anchor through the entire process. He knew everything. He had sat next to me at kitchen tables while I read legal documents. He had driven me to appointments with Ms. Okafor. He had listened to me talk about my grandfather for hours. When we started planning the wedding, we kept it small by intention. 60 people at the ceremony, then a larger reception at a venue in the Forks, about 200 guests by the time we included family, co-workers, friends from our neighborhood. Vera was invited. I want to be clear about that because people have asked me why. She was invited because my grandfather would have wanted her there, because despite everything, she was my mother's sister and the only direct connection I had left to that branch of my family. Because I am not, and I want to say this carefully, I am not the kind of person who uninvites someone to punish them. She was invited. I did not know whether she would come. She came. The ceremony was at 4. The reception started at 6:30. We had dinner. We had speeches. Will's best friend gave a toast that made the whole room laugh. My maid of honor said something about me that made me cry in the best way. Everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. I was standing near the bar with Will's parents around 8:30, half a glass of wine in my hand, when I heard the change in the room. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a single loud noise. It was more like 200 people all pulling their attention toward the same place at the same time, and the sound of that collective turning is actually quite quiet. I looked toward the middle of the room, and there was Vera, standing between 2 tables, glass in her hand, face doing something I recognized from childhood. That particular arrangement of her features that meant she had decided something and was not going to be moved. "I need everyone to know," she said, loudly enough that the DJ turned the music down, either voluntarily or because someone near the booth asked him to, "that this wedding," and she gestured at me, "at Will, at the whole room, is built on stolen money. Fiona stole from this family. She manipulated a dying old man, and she is standing here tonight pretending to celebrate while Owen and I—" She stopped. Because Owen, who was standing about 15 feet away from her, had turned around and was looking at her with an expression I had never seen on my little brother's face before. And because Miss Okafor had stepped into the room, I should explain. Miss Okafor was not on the guest list, but she was in the building. Will and I had discussed it the week before the wedding, quietly, the two of us at our kitchen table. We didn't know for certain that Vera would say something. We didn't know she would choose a public venue. But we had received the judgment from the court 3 weeks earlier, a full, written decision ruling in our favor, finding that the updated will was not valid, that the joint account had been established under circumstances that raised serious concerns about Vera's conduct, and ordering the estate to be distributed in accordance with the original will. And I had a feeling, the kind that settles in your chest and doesn't let go, that Vera was not finished. So I had called Ms. Okafor. I had asked if she would be willing to be present. She had said yes. She walked to the center of the room, introduced herself by name and profession, and handed Vera a sealed envelope. She explained to anyone in earshot, which was everyone, because the room was completely silent, that the envelope contained the written judgment from the Court of Queen's Bench dated 3 weeks prior, along with a summary of the court's findings. She explained that the matter was resolved. She suggested that Vera speak with her own counsel before saying anything further. Vera stood there for a long moment. I watched her read the cover sheet. I watched something go out of her face. She left 20 minutes later. I didn't go after her. Will asked me quietly if I was okay. I told him I was, and I meant it. Owen came and put his arm around my shoulders, and the two of us stood there for a minute without saying anything, and then the DJ, to his absolute credit, started playing again, and someone brought us both a fresh drink, and the night went on. The estate distribution took another 4 months to finalize through the courts. Owen and I each received just over $160,000 after legal fees, considerably more than the original estimate because the duplex sale proceeds were included. Vera's share was reduced substantially, and she was referred to the Law Society and the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit for further review. I don't know what happened with that investigation. Miss Okafor told me it was ongoing as of the last time I spoke with her. Owen used his portion to finish his apprenticeship without the financial stress that had been quietly eating at him for 2 years, and to put a down payment on a small house in East Kildonan. He sent me a photo the day he got the keys, him standing on the front step in his work boots, squinting into the September sun, holding up the keychain. I cried at my desk at work and then went back to my shift. I used part of mine to pay down my mortgage. The rest I put into a TFSA and a small spot. Because Will and I are thinking about the future in ways that would have felt impossible 2 years ago. My grandfather's photo is on our mantel now, in a silver frame that used to sit on his kitchen table. It's a picture from maybe 1985. He's young, standing outside the first dry cleaning shop on Portage, wearing a short-sleeved button-down, squinting against the sun in a way that looks exactly like Owen in that photo on the front step. I look at it sometimes when I come home from a long shift and the apartment is quiet. He told me to keep Mr. Bouchard's number. He knew. He knew what was coming, and he did what he could, and then he trusted me to do the rest. I kept his number, and I finished it. There's a photo of my grandfather on our mantel now, and some evenings I stand in front of it longer than I probably should. He's young in it, younger than I am now, squinting into the Winnipeg sun outside a shop he built with his own hands. I think about what it cost him to sit across from me at that kitchen table and say, quietly, that he knew what was coming, that he had done what he could and was trusting me to carry the rest. I used to think that trust was a kind of weight. Now I think it was a kind of answer. What Vera did wasn't complicated at its core. She decided that she deserved more than she'd been given, and she decided that the most efficient way to get it was to take it from people who couldn't fight back. A dying man whose mind was starting to slip, and 2 adult children still young enough to be dismissed. She had calculated, I think, that grief would make us passive, that we'd be too overwhelmed, too financially stretched, too emotionally drained to look closely at anything. She wasn't entirely wrong about the landscape. She was wrong about us. Owen never talked about it much, but I watched my brother during those months of proceedings, and I saw something steady in him that I hadn't fully recognized before. He showed up to every appointment. He signed every document without complaint. He didn't dramatize, and he didn't collapse. When it was over, he put his key in the door of a house that was genuinely his, and he sent me a photo, and that was enough for both of us. There's a kind of quiet integrity in that, in doing the right thing without needing anyone to witness how hard it was. I learned something about shrewdness during that period that I hadn't expected to need. Not the cold, calculating kind, but the practical kind. The kind that says, read the documents, ask the questions, find the right people, don't wait. My grandfather had shown me the will for a reason. He had given me Mr. Bouchard's number for a reason. The information was there. I just had to be clear-eyed enough to use it and disciplined enough not to let grief talk me out of acting. Being smart, I've come to believe, isn't just about understanding things. It's about choosing not to look away from what you understand, and then there's the part that's harder to name. The part that kept me going on the evenings I sat in my car in a hospital parking lot and cried and then drove home and opened another legal document anyway. I don't know exactly what to call it except that it felt like something owed. Not to myself. To my grandfather, who had worked too hard for too long to have the ending of his story rewritten by someone else's greed. To my mother, who wasn't there. To Owen, who deserved better than to start his adult life having been robbed before he even knew it. You don't get through something like that on optimism. You get through it by deciding every single morning that you're not done yet. The room at our wedding went quiet for a few minutes. Then the music started again. Someone handed me a drink. My husband put his hand on my back, and the night went on. The way nights do. The way life does. When you've already done the hard part before anyone was watching.